At the Knesset this afternoon, the Rabin family and a grieving nation pay their respects to the slain Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Good evening. Welcome to this expanded half-hour edition of IBA News, which will, of course, be dedicated exclusively to the assassination of our Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin. Steve.
A stunned and saddened state of Israel is observing 2 days of national mourning for Prime Minister and Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Flags have been placed at half-mast, and tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m., Rabin will be buried with full military honors at Jerusalem's Mount Herzl Cemetery in the presence of Israeli and world leaders. Yitzhak Rabin's body is currently lying in state at the Knesset as thousands of mourners pay their last respects to the country's fallen leader. Robert Sana reports.
It would be a terrible understatement to say that Israel and much of the world today was in a state of shock and grief over last night's assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. The sorrow which transcended borders will be most evident tomorrow afternoon, when an unprecedented gathering of world leaders in Israel assembles in Jerusalem to attend the state funeral. The burial was delayed to allow for the arrival of dozens of foreign dignitaries from around the globe. This afternoon, in advance of the funeral, thousands of Israelis began paying their last respects to the slain leader outside the Knesset, where Rabin's body will lie in state until tomorrow noon. The first to visit the casket was Rabin's widow, Leah, with her son and daughter, together with President Ezer Weizman, Knesset members, Supreme Court justices, and other prominent Israelis. They were followed by thousands of men, women, and children of all ages and backgrounds who waited patiently to file by the casket, their gloomy faces reflecting the tragic loss felt by the nation. The Egged Bus Company provided free rides from major cities to Jerusalem to help people come to the Knesset Plaza to pay homage. This morning, Rabin made his final journey to Jerusalem, where he was born 73 years ago. His coffin, draped in an Israeli flag, left Tel Aviv's Tel HaShomer military cemetery in an open-backed IDF command car, accompanied by 8 IDF generals and senior police officers. Police on motorcycles led the slow procession, which was watched by people standing in silence on both sides of the route. The motorcade passed the site where, in 1948, as a young officer during the War of Independence, Rabin fought hard to secure the road for Israel. As the nation began 2 days of national mourning, the mood of the country was a mix of disbelief and sorrow. People lit memorial candles, raised black flags, hung portraits of Rabin, and assembled at various spots in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. All places of entertainment were closed today, while flags at state institutions were lowered to half-mast until after the funeral. At schools, pupils stood for a moment's silence at the start of classes in memory of the country's first leader ever assassinated.
I feel very bad, and there's no word to express the feeling. And we can just hope that this murder will put us all together.
At 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, the nation will come to a halt. Sirens will sound for 2 minutes as Israelis stand in silence at the start of the funeral, which will take place at Jerusalem's Mount Herzl Cemetery. Some 40 world leaders, including U.S. President Bill Clinton, British Prime Minister John Major, German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, and French President Jacques Chirac, said today that they will attend the ceremony. From the Arab world, Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak said that he will come, which would mark the first time that he will visit Israel. Jordan's King Hussein and Morocco's King Hassan also announced that they would be among the mourners. Many American Jews plan to travel to Israel, where they will join former U.S. Presidents George Bush, Jimmy Carter, and Gerald Ford, and former U.S. Secretaries of State James Baker and Henry Kissinger. Many hotels in Jerusalem have asked their guests to leave to make room for the mourners.
You know, Steve, we see these images of people coming out and mourning, of the family mourning, and there's still this refusal to believe that this nightmare is real.
Yes, and you were there, Leah, last night. You were covering the rally at Kikar Melchei Israel.
It was one of those watershed moments. I think that years from now we'll be asking each other, where were you on that night when Yitzhak Rabin was shot? And yes, I was there, and this is the way it looked. The evening that ended in brutal tragedy began in a mood approaching euphoria for Prime Minister Rabin. Friends said they believed it was one of the happiest days of his life. Reveling in an outpouring of love from an estimated 100,000 supporters at a rally whose theme was yes to peace, no to violence, Rabin spoke with hope of the chances of real peace. At the high point of the rally, singer Miri Aloni invited Rabin and Shimon Peres to join her in singing the 60s classic Shir LaShalom, a song to peace. Rabin's blood-soaked copy would later be found on the ground near the shooting. Surrounded by bodyguards, Rabin made his way to his car, parked behind the square. A figure darted out of the shadows behind the car and fired at point-blank range.
I was 1 meter with my wife, and I saw him laying with closed eyes, with glasses, and his car.
Bodyguards rushed the fatally wounded Prime Minister to nearby Ichilov Hospital as security forces chased and captured the assassin, 27-year-old Bar-Ilan law student Yigal Amir of Herzliya. At the hospital, crowds gathered, waiting for word. Rabin's distraught wife, Leah, the nation's leaders from President Weitzman on down, swept into the hospital compound. At 11:15, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was pronounced dead.
At 11:10 p.m., as an outcome of murderous, criminal assassination attempt, the Prime Minister of Israel and the Minister of Defense, Mr. Yitzhak Rabin, passed away. He was hit by 3 bullets in his chest and his abdomen. On his arrival here, he was without blood pressure, without pulse, and all the intensive resuscitation attempts, unfortunately, failed.
No one who was there can ever forget the moments that followed. There was disbelief, shock, and an outpouring of grief and rage. Yitzhak Rabin was dead, the first leader in Israel's history to be assassinated. And everyone knew, after this, nothing would be the same.
Police Minister Moshe Shachal says the suspect in the Rabin assassination would have also shot Foreign Minister Peres if the two men had left the Tel Aviv peace rally together. More on suspect Yigal Amir in this report from Dennis Zim.
The killer, 27-year-old Yigal Amir, is a third-year law student at Bar-Ilan University with no criminal records. Nevertheless, he is known to the police from different anti-government demonstrations. Here he is seen being carried off by police officers when he attended an illegal demonstration on Givat HaDagan. Although there is no proof that he was a member of the extremist underground group, Eyal, he apparently did have some contact with them because they reportedly claimed to know him. Amir told investigators that this was the third time that he had set out to kill the Prime Minister. The first 2 opportunities did not materialize. Last night he said he had hoped to kill both Rabin and Foreign Minister Shimon Peres. He expressed no remorse over the murder. Amir is due to appear before a judge tomorrow morning for an extension of his remand. Security sources said that strong measures will be adopted following the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. The General Security Services today began an investigation of their unit, which protects the President, the Prime Minister, and other VIPs. They are looking into the circumstances leading up to the breach of security in which a killer got within meters of the Prime Minister. It seems certain that officers will be suspended and that heads will roll. There are 3 circles of security at an event such as last night's pro-peace rally. First, there's the local police force maintaining routine law and order. Secondly, special police units are brought in, such as anti-riot units and anti-terrorist squads. Finally, the VIPs have their special security officers, especially chosen and trained by the General Security Services to thwart assassination attempts. Over the last few months, the intelligence and security agencies expressed concern over the verbal violence directed towards the government and especially towards the Prime Minister by right-wing elements. The agencies have been closely following extremist organizations and individuals. They had warned the Prime Minister and the rest of the cabinet on numerous occasions of the danger of a physical attack. A profile was constructed of the anonymous assassin, an unaffiliated, disillusioned person with extreme right-wing tendencies who would be influenced by anti-government slander. This, they say, is the most difficult type of person to pick up on before the act. The killer, 27-year-old Yigal Amir, fits this category. Immediately following the assassination, the IDF closed off the territories. This in order to prevent the possibility of Palestinian terrorists taking advantage of the sensitive environment to carry out an attack. Dennis Zinn, IBA News.
Shimon Peres is now the acting Prime Minister, and the cabinet will carry on as a transitional government. David Essing has that report.
Immediately after news of Yitzhak Rabin's death, the cabinet met in Tel Aviv to appoint Shimon Peres as the acting prime minister. Peres then announced there would be continuity in pursuing the government's peace policy.
It's a tragic day for the Jewish people, for the state of Israel, for our neighbors, for the peace process all over the world. Yitzhak Rabin was an exceptional person and an exceptional leader.
With the death of the prime minister, the cabinet is deemed to have resigned, and it now continues as a caretaker government. President Ezra Weizman will begin consultations on who to call upon to try and form a new government.
I call upon the citizens of the State of Israel. I call them to order, not to start looking for who is at fault and trying to find new victims in this terrible discussion that we have on the future of our state.
Shimon Peres will undoubtedly receive the mandate. The Likud has already declined. Leader Bibi Netanyahu says in a democratic society, the government is changed by the ballot, not the bullet. Shimon Peres faces a daunting challenge, the greatest of his long career. And there are some glaring question marks. Who would become defense minister? Ehud Barak is an obvious choice. And then who would take over at the foreign ministry? A second option is a national unity government with the Likud. Possible but highly unlikely. The Likud would insist on putting the brakes on the government's peace process, which Peres wants to advance as swiftly as possible. Thirdly, the Knesset could opt for an early election. But for Labor, this would be a last resort. Meanwhile, under the law, the President cabinet portfolios stay where they are. This is David Essing reporting.
A tearful Chief Rabbi Yisrael Lau said that Prime Minister Rabin would be remembered as both hero of the Six-Day War and architect of peace with the Palestinians. From across the political spectrum came sharp condemnations of the assassination. The political left chastised right-wing incitement against the peace process. Environment Minister Yossi Sarid pointed a finger at those who carried signs and shouted, "Rabin the traitor," as being responsible for creating the atmosphere leading to murder. Deputy Minister of Education Micha Goldman directly blamed the Likud for inciting violence against the government. Tzalmet leader Raphael Eitan sharply condemned Goldman, saying his remarks were a call for civil war. Eitan said that for months the opposition leaders had called for demonstrators to act responsibly. Opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu said he was deeply shocked by the murder.
I'm shocked, like all the people of Israel, at the horrible crime that was committed today. It's a violation of the first principle of human society and the first Jewish commandment, thou shalt not kill.
We're trying to figure how we can do our very best to calm down the situation and to get the feeling of union and confidence to the people of Israel. Because what we really need now is a feeling and a trend towards being together and make the extreme less extreme than they are today, to calm down the people and to let everybody know that the base of democracy in Israel is so stable that nothing can break it down.
On the extreme right, members of Ayal, Kach and Kahane Chai have reportedly gone into hiding. Zu Artzenu condemned the assassination, but at the same time blamed the government for causing deep polarization of Israel and putting the nation on the edge of civil war. The Yesha Council was unequivocal in condemning the murder and called for the nation to stand as one against violence and to avoid pointing fingers of blame.
Maybe there is a political difference between us, but for us, Rabin is the prime minister, was the prime minister, and Israel's grieve together about this prime minister that is contribute to Israel.
The PLO's Yasser Arafat will not be attending the funeral of Prime Minister Rabin. A PLO spokesman said Arafat's attendance at the funeral needs very complicated preparations, and he added that Arafat is needed in Gaza to follow up and face developments. Arafat was quick to condemn the murder of Rabin, labelling it a terrible crime.
I am very sad and very shocked for this awful and terrible crime against one of the brave leaders of Israel and the peacemakers. I hope that they will have the ability, all of us, the Israelis and the Palestinians, will have the ability to overcome this tragedy.
Elsewhere in Judea, Samaria and Gaza, reaction was mixed, with most Palestinians denouncing the shooting and expressing concern for the future of the peace process. Still others applauded Rabin's murder, claiming they had suffered at his hands.
The death of Yitzhak Rabin outraged Jordan's King Hussein. The Jordanian monarch said he was angry that his friend and peace partner had been cut down by an assassin's bullet.
This is a tragic battle, but we have to fight it. Those who belong to the peace camp and those who oppose it. I've known him over the years and have worked with him very hard to achieve a common objective. And to me, he was a brother and a friend.
But in sharp contrast to King Hussein was the reaction from Iran, Libya and Sudan, where Islamic leaders call the killing of Rabin justified. The head of the Islamic Jihad in Syria said he was not sorry, labeling Rabin a criminal. In Beirut, hundreds of Arabs celebrated the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin, shouting, "Death to Israel." In the Palestinian refugee camp of Ain al-Hilwi near Sidon, residents danced with joy and fired guns into the air. And in Amman, a spokesman for the terrorist organization Hamas said Rabin's murder should have surprised no one.
First of all, we were not surprised. We expect that this split inside Israel will escalate, and in this area we think that the conflict will continue.
US President Bill Clinton has ordered that all US flags on public buildings, embassies and military bases around the world be flown at half-mast until after tomorrow's funeral. Clinton, clearly shaken, his voice choked with emotion, spoke at the White House after talking on the telephone with Yitzhak Rabin's widow, Leah, and acting Prime Minister, Shimon Peres.
The world has lost one of its greatest men, a warrior for his nation's freedom, and now a martyr for his nation's peace. So now, we all stand by you in this moment of grieving. Peace must be, and peace will be, Prime Minister Rabin's lasting legacy. Tonight, the land for which he gave his life is in mourning. But I want the world to remember what Prime Minister Rabin said here at the White House barely 1 month ago. And I quote, "We should not let the land flowing with milk and honey become a land flowing with blood and tears. Don't let it happen." Now it falls to us, all those in Israel, throughout the Middle East, and around the world who yearn for and love peace, to make sure it doesn't happen. Yitzhak Rabin was my partner and my friend. I admired him, and I loved him very much. Because words cannot express my true feelings, let me just say, Shalom, Haver. Goodbye, friend.
Shock and outrage over the Prime Minister's assassination has been pouring in from around the world. UN Secretary-General Boutros-Boutros-Ghali expressed deep regret over Rabin's murder, calling his death a great loss for Israel and the world at large. German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who was due to meet Mr. Rabin in Germany next month, expressed his sadness and praised the Prime Minister for his efforts to achieve peace in the Middle East. Britain's Queen Elizabeth has sent a telegram to President Esa Weitzman expressing her shock, whilst her Prime Minister John Major voiced his condemnation, describing Rabin as a man who dedicated his life to peace. Russian President Boris Yeltsin, hospitalized with a heart condition, called Rabin an outstanding statesman whose name will go down in history. Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Andrei Kozyrov has expressed confidence that the peace process will continue.
It's a devastation, loss of Rabin, yet there is his ally, Shimon Peres, who stands on his place and who will, to my mind, lead to the same way. So we will help him to do so, and other people in Israel who want peace.
French President Jacques Chirac, who called Prime Minister Rabin a great statesman, also expressed his confidence that the peace process will not be derailed. In Rome, Pope John Paul said he deplored the killing. In his weekly address and blessing in St. Peter's Square, the pontiff hoped the assassination would prod people into continuing Rabin's mission and keep his vision of peace alive. In other reaction, Georgian leader Eduard Shevardnadze described Rabin as a hero who had achieved the near impossible for peace in the Middle East. Other tributes have come from Jacques Santer, the president of the European Commission, whilst the Turkish president Süleyman Demirel said Yitzhak Rabin will always be remembered for his unshakable belief and effort towards providing peace and compromise in a region full of conflicts. South African President Nelson Mandela has urged Israelis and Palestinians to honor Rabin by ensuring the peace process is sustained with vigor. The life of Yitzhak Rabin was almost a closed circle. He was a soldier, the general who led the army of Israel to victory in the 1967 Six-Day War. He was also the man of peace, whose final battle was the struggle to resolve the legacy of that war and end forever the Arab-Israeli conflict. Yitzhak Rabin was born in 1922 in Jerusalem. While still in high school, Rabin joined the Haganah, the underground Jewish fighting force led by Moshe Dayan. Its aim, to end British mandatory rule in Palestine. By 1947, Rabin had become deputy commander of the Palmach strike force serving under Yigal Allon. During the War of Independence, he commanded the Harel brigades in defense of Jerusalem. In 1964, he became chief of staff and was commander of the IDF during the Six-Day War, when Israeli forces, responding to Arab threats of annihilation, expanded the country's borders from the Golan Heights in the north to the Jordan River in the east and captured the entire Sinai Peninsula. Rabin's strategy defeated the combined forces of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. The crowning triumph was reuniting Jerusalem after 19 years of division. A year later, Rabin was appointed Israeli ambassador to the United States. In 1974, the politically inexperienced Rabin reaches the pinnacle of power, succeeding Golda Meir as prime minister. He launches a new era of shuttle diplomacy between Israel and Egypt under U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, laying the foundations for the Israel-Egypt peace treaty. In 1976, Entebbe, Rabin gives the green light for the bold rescue of more than 100 Israelis hijacked by Palestinians and held hostage in Uganda. A year later, Rabin resigns after disclosures of his wife's illegal U.S. bank account. But in 1984, he returns to government, serving as defense minister in Labour and Likud administrations. He tackles head-on the Palestinian Intifada, which erupted in 1987 and lasted for 6 years. In 1992, Rabin led the Labour Party to election victory and pledged to lead the country to peace. September 1993, Rabin, Shimon Peres and PLO chairman Yasser Arafat meet in Washington. The historic handshake is marked as one of the historic moments of the century. The first autonomy accord granting the Palestinians self-rule in Gaza and Jericho is sealed. But Rabin encounters heavy internal opposition fueled by savage Islamic terrorism aimed at derailing the fragile peace process. 1993, Rabin and King Hussein of Jordan, old friends and former enemies, meet in the US Capitol to end 46 years of war between the two countries. 1994, Rabin, Peres, and Arafat share the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts in Mideast peace. 1995, Rabin is back in Washington to sign the interim agreement expanding Palestinian self-rule in the territories. November 4th, after attending a peace rally in Tel Aviv, Rabin is shot dead by an assassin's bullets. He was the warrior, the peacemaker, the politician, the diplomat, a man for all seasons. Joining us now in the studio is Yitzhak Rabin's biographer, Robert Slater, who wrote the book simply called Rabin of Israel. Bob, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What will be, in your view, the legacy of Yitzhak Rabin?
Well, I think that Rabin is the first Israeli prime minister to give the country the feeling that a comprehensive peace is possible. He got as far as he did, much farther than people expected. It was an extremely tense period that culminated in his own death. And if indeed future prime ministers in the next 10, 15 years bring a comprehensive peace agreement, I think Rabin will be the prime minister to whom we will all point as the one who gave that push.
Bob, you spent long hours with Rabin interviewing him for your book. Rabin was seen as a blunt, plain-spoken man, that the sense was what you saw was what you got. Were there any surprises for you in interviewing Rabin?
Well, I wasn't surprised that he was blunt. I suppose I was surprised that he was not a terribly warm man. He was kind of the anti-politician. Of course, in Israel, that didn't really count. Rabin was always considered a leader. He was a leader in the military going back to almost his childhood, and he stood out. I think I knew this when I went into the book that I wrote about him, and if there are any surprises, I suppose, it's that he became a much greater leader than when I started the book back in the 70s.
Right.
Bob, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
That was Bob Slater, Yitzhak Rabin's biographer. Yitzhak Rabin's final act was attending the peace rally in Kikar Melchei Israel. His speech was that of a warrior turned peacemaker. Rabin then joined in the singing of a song of peace.
And that's all for this special edition of IBA News. Israel Television will continue to provide full coverage of the assassination and its aftermath.